Hey everybody, welcome back to Retro Modding News, my weekly video where I talk about what's new and upcoming in the world of retro console modding. This video is sponsored by PCBWay, but more on PCBWay later. First, let's go over this new lag tester from Zwenergy. He's calling it the douche lag. Yes, that's the name of his lag tester. The main idea behind this new lag tester is to try to automatically test the lag chain from the controller to the actual output of a certain system. In the picture here, you can see that Zwenergy has this device hooked up between a wireless Super Nintendo controller on the left there, and then the GBA HD Game Boy Advance consolizer on the right. The consolizer itself is running some software that this device is able to control. What I've been able to gather from the comments here is that whenever you press a button on the controller, it sends a signal to the consolizer or whatever it's hooked up to turn off the screen. Then this device in the middle here must have some sort of a light sensor. I don't think it's a camera, I think it's a light sensor, and it will be able to detect how long it's been since you pressed the button to when the actual console, or in this case consolizer, shuts the screen off. I think this is pretty big news because the current best method for trying to tell how much lag is in the entire system from when you press a button on the controller is basically to solder an LED into the controller. So when you press a button, it turns an LED on or off, and then using a high speed, high FPS camera, detect how many frames that the camera can capture before the input actually takes place on the screen. So this is a pretty manual process. I've seen both Bob from NESRGB and Macho Nacho made a video about how to do this method, and it seems really intensive. You need a specific kind of camera, and even then they're using these older Sony cameras that can do like 500 or 1000 FPS or something. Those cameras that are, they're pretty old at this point, they go for like $500 on eBay. So the equipment that you need is definitely not cheap to do the current best method. So if Zwenergy's automated system works well, then that should be a very useful tool for people in the future being able to lag test new mods, controllers, and just to make sure that things are actually as low latency as they claim to be. Another thing that I didn't initially think of is it probably would be possible to run the software on different types of systems as well. Bob from NESRGB even commented that it might be possible to incorporate this software into the 240p test suite. So you might be able to run this same automated lag testing system on any console that can run the 240p test suite. So this is definitely an interesting device. I'm curious how much the bill of materials and all the stuff that you need to run this system costs, because if it's pretty low cost and it works well, then I think a lot of people are going to start using this to test their systems. John 3D, aka Joe the Ripper, is responsible for this N64 BT Dual. I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was last week now. This is a 2-port BlueRetro adapter for the N64. The reason I'm bringing it back up is because John 3D has released the files on printables and some instructions on how you can set up your own N64 BT Dual. So here's what the BlueRetro adapter looks like. BlueRetro, if you didn't know, is a way to connect Bluetooth controllers to these adapters so that you can use them on older retro consoles. Here's a close-up of the actual insides. It looks like it's just wires soldered to the N64 controller ports straight to an ESP32. So if you're interested in building your own N64 BlueRetro adapter, something a little bit better than what I released in my video, basically just soldering wires directly to the ESP32, just kind of exposed to the air with no case or anything. If you want to build one with an actual case, then this project seems pretty cool. Next up, we have this interesting post from Retro Gamer Store. They're currently working on these transparent console shells for the NES, but this tweet they're asking if they want people to release a smoke transparent shell for the NES. There's a couple of pictures here of the side-by-side between the transparent clear pieces and the sort of smoke transparent pieces. So this piece here that's like a vent, and the door here is. This doesn't surprise me because they already offer the smoke transparent color for the Sega Genesis shells that they make. So yeah, if you're interested in some smoke transparent shells for the NES, then you should reply in this thread from Retro Gamer Store. Last week I talked about these replacement Famicom PCBs from Retro Castle Store on AliExpress. In the pictures, it kind of looks like the components on this new Famicom board match the components that are on the NESRGB. So Voltar and myself kind of thought that that meant that they were just kind of cloning the NESRGB for those Famicom boards. But I got this comment here on that YouTube video, and it said that it's not a clone of the NESRGB kit. The development for these Famicom boards has been going on for a while, and they said that this is a complete FPGA PPU, sort of unlike the NESRGB, where the NESRGB uses an FPGA to emulate some portions of the PPU, so it's not exactly the same. It seems like they just changed some of the input and output options on the physical board, so maybe they did need some components that might be similar to the NESRGB, but I have also gotten other people saying that this project has been going on for a while, the Famicom replacement board from Retro Castle. But it is still a little suspicious that they've removed the Famicom listing from their AliExpress store, so I don't really know what that means, but I think it's possible that this is not a clone and they really have been working on their project for a couple of years now. Next, we have a new PicoStation implementation by ManCloud. ManCloud is one of the developers who helped Zwenergy to create the GBA HD consoleizer. He helped create the shield for the GBA HD. And now he has what looks like a new PicoStation prototype assembled and working. PicoStation is a PlayStation 1 ODE from Palo 7X8. The interesting thing about the PicoStation is it uses the Raspberry Pi RP2040 processor, which is a very low-cost processor that has really good performance. So like ManCloud is talking about here, it looks like each one of his new boards fully assembled is $7 complete. So that includes all of the parts to assemble it, and it's assembled already. So this PicoStation project is really awesome for being able to let people use an ODE on the PlayStation 1 for a pretty low cost. It does have the same install process as the NextStation though, so it will still require a QSB on the underside of the PlayStation 1 board that hooks up into this PicoStation. And knowing ManCloud, they'll probably open source this project, so we'll have a low cost, open source ODE for the PlayStation 1. Speaking of open source retro projects, I want to thank the sponsor of this week's video, PCBWay. PCBWay is a custom PCB manufacturer that can produce the custom PCBs that you need for your open source retro modding project. PCBWay has fast turnaround time, so you can get the custom PCBs that you need. They provide 3D printing services as well, so if you don't have a 3D printer, they've got you covered. They even provide CNC machining and injection molding services if you're looking to create a professional product. Thanks again to PCBWay. You can find out more by visiting the link in the video description. For the big story this week, let's talk about the M.2 prototype that Macho Nacho talked about in his recent video. I've known about WebHDX's M.2 loader for a while now. In fact, I knew about that project before I knew about PicoBoot. There haven't been that many updates about the M.2 loader since then, until Macho Nacho released this video going over the M.2 loader prototype that he has. I took a few notes from Macho Nacho's video, so let's talk about the things that we know now and the things that are going to change between this prototype and the final revision. I suggest if you haven't watched this video to go watch it first, and then we can come back and talk about it here. So let's quickly go over what the M.2 loader actually is. It's going to be another way to load games on a GameCube that is running on Swiss. So currently we have the SD2, SB2, and the SD Gecko as ways of getting files from SD cards to load into Swiss, but this M.2 loader has a few new features and basically larger capacity as well. So we already knew that it uses serial port 1, which is the larger port on the bottom of the GameCube. It uses M.2 form factor SATA SSDs, so SATA only. So this will not be compatible with NVMe SSDs. I think that point is probably going to trip a lot of people up, that they can't just buy any M.2 form factor SSD. They need one that is actually SATA, which is a little bit older. And I think it's actually written onto the silk screen, kind of warning people to only use SATA SSDs. According to Macho Nacho, it has better compatibility versus the SD2, SB2, and the SD Gecko as far as games actually running. He had a test where he did side by side from the, I think he used the SD2, SB2 running a Mario Party intro, and he compared that to the performance using the M.2 loader. It did look like it loaded faster in the video, but from the footage alone, I don't think that it's 100% there. Like, it's not 100% speed, unless it's just the GameCube being really slow. Macho Nacho mentioned that the M.2 loader has a CPLD on it that somehow communicates with the GameCube to increase the transfer speed on the EXI bus. So even though the SB2, serial port 2, serial port 1, and the memory card slot are all on the EXI bus, apparently there's some secret sauce or something, some chip on the M.2 loader that allows it to go faster. The final version is going to use the RP2040 as well, so it's not going to use a CPLD, it's going to use the low-cost Raspberry Pi Pico processor. We pretty much already knew that it was going to use Swiss, so like the SD2, SB2, and the SD Gecko, you need to use Swiss to load games from it. And currently you need to boot into Swiss with another media, so like an SD2, SB2, or SD Gecko, you have to use that to get into Swiss, and then you can use Swiss to read the M.2 loader. And there's an asterisk that this should be fixed in the final revision so that you will not have to use a second SD card to load Swiss, it should be rolled somehow into the M.2 loader itself. And the last note that I have here is it sounds like it won't 100% clear up the compatibility list for the GameCube. It sounds like it will still have all the limitations that something like the GC loader will have. So to me, that sort of sounds like a Swiss limitation, not being able to, I don't know, fully realize all the GameCube hardware or something. Or maybe it's not possible to get the last 100% of the compatibility down. So I think that's important for people to understand, is it sounds like this will not have 100% compatibility. And I still think that there should be a giant Swiss game compatibility chart that has all the different ways that you can load games, GC loader, SD2, SP2, SD Gecko, M.2 loader when it comes out. I think that we should have a compatibility list and something like, how long it takes to boot a game for each different iteration, even across different Swiss firmwares. But I don't know, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Do you think that's worth people's time trying to suss out the exact compatibility with all these different GameCube products? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. That's it for this week, but check out this video if you want to see more information about that Retro Castle Famicom PCB. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.